The mysterious disappearance of the Gilded Age heiress, Newport 1793. You were never meant to hear this, but now that you are, there's no going back. She vanished without a trace. No ransom, no blood, no farewell. One day she was the daughter of one of America's wealthiest men, walking the gilded halls of Newport's elite. The next she was a whisper, a rumor, a shadow erased from time. Her name was Evelyn Blackwood, and the year was 1793, an age of powdered wigs, secret societies, and fortunes built on the backs of the invisible. America was still an infant, crawling toward power, but Newport was a throne of old money already soaked in secrets. Evelyn was born into what we now call generational wealth. The Blackwoods owned not just land, but influence, the kind of influence that stretched silently across dinner parties, into the pockets of judges, captains, and preachers. Their estate, Mariner's Grasp, was an opulent Georgian mansion built high on a cliffside, facing the sea as if daring the Atlantic to challenge its rule. But like every fortress of pride, its stones were mortared with something darker. Deals made in hushed tones, allegiances carved with blades, not ink. Evelyn was 22 the last time anyone truly saw her, described as radiant, defiant, and uncommonly intelligent. She was not the delicate ornament her father had hoped to marry off. Rumor had it she read books women weren't supposed to read: alchemy, old philosophies, dissection manuals. She would slip out at night, cloaked, barefoot, disappearing into the fog-soaked paths behind Mariner's Grasp. Her maid once claimed she spoke in Latin to mirrors. Another said Evelyn had developed an obsession with the cellar beneath the east wing, a part of the estate, sealed for over 100 years, the townspeople whispered. But they always whispered. They said Evelyn Blackwood was not meant for marriage but for sacrifice. They said the Blackwood family had not earned their wealth through trade alone. They said the founding patriarch, Elias Blackwood, was not merely a merchant but a seeker, part of a buried European cult that fled to the colonies. After the Inquisition decimated their order, his journals were never found, but legends grew from the ruins of his library, where pages had been torn from the walls and burned, and the family crest had been scratched out from the stone hearth, a serpent devouring its own tail. But here's the part they won't tell you in school, or in textbooks, or even in hushed academia. Evelyn didn't vanish. She was taken, and not just by a man or a madman, but by something older, something embedded in the power structure of her family, something that required silence to survive. Because 1793 wasn't just any year, it was the year of the Council of Nine's Eastern Gathering, a ritual event that occurred only once every 117 years, a convergence not found on any public calendar, but etched in ancient Masonic cipher and hidden deep in the vaults of Boston's first banking house. It is said that the most powerful families in America, not yet called America, would send their most prized bloodline to this gathering, not to negotiate, not to trade, but to bind. Evelyn was chosen, and the cellar she so often visited. It was not a cellar, it was a threshold, a gate carved beneath the estate, older than the mansion itself, built by hands that left no name in history, only symbols, spirals, tridents, and the twisted mark of the seraphim reversed. What happened in that darkness has been the subject of hushed research, stolen documents, and entire careers ruined for knowing too much. But what we do know is this: the night Evelyn vanished, the sky over Newport cracked open. Thunder without storm, lights without source, and a scream so high, so animal that the fishermen at sea claimed it wasn't human, claimed it echoed for hours, even though no one else in town could hear it. Only those on the water, only those closest to the old routes once used by the whaling vessels of Blackwood's early empire. And then silence. The next morning, her room was untouched, bed made, fireplace cold, journal gone. The Blackwoods said nothing, held no funeral, gave no statement. They threw a ball that weekend, laughed in powdered wigs and ruby necklaces, as if nothing had happened, as if Evelyn had never existed. And if you go to the Newport archives today, her name does not appear in the official Blackwood lineage, but the family tree has a natter blank space where something was erased, digitally redacted in the early 2000s by archivists who now deny ever touching the files. But here's where the descent begins. Because Evelyn's story is not unique, it is a pattern, one you begin to see only after you've collected enough whispers, mapped enough vanishings, connected enough dots across centuries. Newport, Charleston, Marin County. All women, all from elite families, all vanished before their 23rd birthday, and all connected to something they were never supposed to uncover. This isn't about ghosts, this is about ritualized power maintenance. The old ways, the ancient agreements made between bloodlines and entities long before the Constitution was ever written. You feel it, don't you? The tension in your chest, the part of your mind that wants to look away. Single quotes, this is how they win. This is how they have always won, by making you believe there's nothing there. But Evelyn was just a girl who ran away, that the Blackwoods were just rich. But the truth, power does not just happen. It is sacrificed into . And when a society becomes addicted to progress without purpose, when greed replaces wisdom, and vanity replaces virtue, the old forces return to collect what is owed. Evelyn Blackwood was the debt, the price paid to keep a family's name in stone, to ensure that their crests did not crumble, that their ships kept sailing and their vaults stayed full. You think this is ancient? Look again. Do you know how many corporate boardrooms in 2025 still use Masonic geometry in their architecture? Do you know how many Ivy League schools have hidden chambers beneath their oldest halls? Do you know what's buried under the cornerstone of America's first central bank? They've kept it hidden for centuries because once you see it, it changes. You like Evelyn. She didn't just disappear, she crossed over into something else, into the side of the world the elite don't speak of but guard religiously, the realm of binding pacts, silences, currency and institutions built not to educate or govern but to maintain a singular spell, control. So ask yourself this: what does your lineage owe? What has your silence cost you? What would you find if you tore open the floorboards of your family history because Evelyn found the truth and they made her vanish for it? But we will not vanish, we will descend together. Because only in the dark can you see the architects of the world that controls you. And this is just the beginning. Descent into the 9 blood, books, and the machinery of silence. You ever wonder why the rich don't talk? Not about their secrets, not about their deals, not even about their families. You can attend their galas, dine at their tables, watch their interviews, but you'll never hear them speak of the old lineages, not the real ones, not the ones behind the suits and foundations, and certainly not the ones behind Evelyn Blackwood's disappearance. Because there are 2 timelines running through history, the one you're taught, and the one that teaches them. Let's go back to what Evelyn found beneath the floorboards of Mariners. Grasp in 1793. Old stone, dry air, and walls lined with books, not shelves, walls themselves that opened like drawers, packed with tomes that had no titles, only symbols burned into cracked leather, Ouroboros inverted trees, a cross with no top. She read them all, not over weeks or months but in obsessive, fevered nights, as if the knowledge was alive. As if something in the ink reached out to her through time, and what she found was not fiction, not myth, but blueprints. Maps of control systems, instructions on psychological manipulation, schematics for constructing obedience, and she saw it, the machine beneath the world, the gears behind polite society. Let me ask you, have you ever felt like something's watching you, not from outside, but through the rules you're forced to follow? That's not paranoia, that's architecture, because power has always needed a structure to stand on. But what they never told you is that the foundation isn't wealth or military force, it's belief, your willingness to obey, submit, conform, worship, kneel. What Evelyn discovered is that belief itself was engineered, cultivated like a crop. The Council of 9 didn't gather to worship, they gathered to refine. Tighten the system. 9 seats, 9 lineages, 9 ancient houses, each with bloodlines stretching back to the pre-Christian mystery cults. Not kings, not popes, custodians. Their job: maintain the silence, adjust the strings, ensure that every generation produced at least one candidate capable of renewing the oath, a pact of the bound flame. Evelyn's family had been chosen generations before her birth. Not for wealth, for compliance. And her ancestors had paid their dues. In blood, in loyalty, in children. But Evelyn broke the cycle. She read the books, she saw the design, and I noticed, because they always do. That's the part people miss. These families don't need cameras. They don't need surveillance. They engineered a world in which every institution is a mirror, and every mirror reflects you back as something docile. From the curriculum in your schools, to the songs you hum without thinking, to the medicine that quiets your doubt, to the clock that divides your days into units of productivity, not peace. This isn't conspiracy, this is design. And Evelyn, she found the original draft. She found the first book of the Nina ledger that traced their contracts, encrypted in archaic Latin and Hebrew, charting every bloodline tied to the original sacrifice system: Rome, Carthage, Alexandria, and then, eventually, Boston, Charleston, Newport. In the margins, symbols of lunar eclipses, coded dates, and initials. E.B. Next to her own name. As if they'd known. As if it had already been written. That's when the dreams began. According to the sole surviving letter from her chambermaid, later found stuffed behind a rotting beam in the attic of Mariners, Evelyn began to speak in sleep. Not gibberish. Names, dates, coordinates. She'd wake up with bruises on her wrists, as if she'd been held. The maid claimed she saw Evelyn once, standing at the mirror, speaking in a language she didn't recognize, but the reflection wasn't matching her mouth movements. You think that's madness? It's conditioning, a ritual they call inversion. Step 1. Fracture the self. Step 2. Bind it to a greater will. Step 3. Erase the proof. The Council of 9 believed in no single god. They believed in recurrence, that history wasn't a line but a wheel, and control came from staying at the center while the rest of the world spun in confusion. And every few cycles, a family must offer one who has seen the wheel to renew the central pact. Evelyn saw it, and so they came. The day before her disappearance, she entered the East Wing at 2:33 a.m. The housekeeper saw the candlelight. No one ever saw her again, but something else emerged. In the week that followed, 3 servants quit with no explanation. The gardener, silent for 30 years, hung himself from the gnarled willow that now no longer exists on the Blackwood grounds. Cut down, salted, erased, and the Blackwoods, they expanded their shipping empire within 5 months. By autumn, they'd received a federal contract for privateering on behalf of the young American Navy. The family's wealth tripled, and their name was secured. Coincidence? Not when you see the pattern. The same rise in fortune followed after the Van Dorns of Charleston lost their daughter to a sailing accident in 1902. The same uptick in prestige after the Harrington heiress was institutionalized. In 1959, her entire psychiatric file burned in a mysterious fire days before her 24th birthday. This is the blood price, and it doesn't just happen in mansions or seaside cliffs. It happens in labs, in foundations, in think tanks and boardrooms, places where control must be passed down like a candle lit in darkness, always protected, never questioned. Do you feel it now? The sense that something ancient has been pulling strings long before you were born. Good. That means you're waking up, but be warned. Awareness comes at a cost. The deeper you go, the more they watch. You see, Evelyn's greatest sin wasn't discovering the truth. It was trying to speak it. According to a monk's journal in the Vatican archives, long hidden, smuggled out in microfilm by a rogue Jesuit, Evelyn wrote a letter to a man named Elijah Penn, a known Freemason and pamphleteer in Boston. She described the nine, the cellar, the inverted rituals. She begged him to publish it. He never replied. He died in a house fire 2 weeks later, and the letter, filed under unidentified correspondence, destroyed. But fragments survived. 4 lines copied by a scribe. If they make me disappear, it means I was right. If you read this, you have inherited my war. The lie is deep, and so are the tunnels. You know what to do next. If you've come this far, you're not just curious, you're becoming something else, someone else. You're no longer just watching, you're stepping across the threshold. Evelyn crossed, and that means we need to mark this moment. Comment, I see the wheel. I break the silence. Commented twice. Once for her, once for you. You're not doing this for the algorithm, you're doing it for the symbol, for the act of defiance, for the ancient spell of silence, to crack one whisper at a time. Because from this point on, you're no longer the same. You're part of the descent. The vault below, the Blackwood seal, and America's forgotten pact. You were never meant to open this door. But now that you have, you'll never close it again. They told you America was born from revolution, that it was forged in fire, liberty, and democratic ideals. But that's not the full truth, because behind the fireworks and parchment, behind the powdered wigs and lofty speeches, there was a pact, not one signed in ink, but in blood. And at the heart of that pact lies a name most Americans have never heard because they were trained not to. The Blackwood Vault, hidden beneath the original Blackwood estate in Newport. This vault predates the mansion itself by almost 2 centuries. It wasn't designed for treasure or heirlooms. It was built to contain a contract, a living, evolving, binding ritual between the Blackwood line and what early colonial records refer to as the bound flame. Let's make something very clear. This was not metaphor. This was not some poetic symbol of ambition. The bound flame was the entity the 9 believed powered their bloodline, not worshipped, not adored, feared, controlled, kept sealed behind layers of ritual, allegiance, and genetic obedience. It was said to feed on 3 things: memory, lineage, choice, mori because it thrives in silence, erased pasts, hidden truths. Lineage because only certain bloodlines could hold the fire without madness. Choice because every generation had to choose to renew the pact. And that's where Evelyn comes back in. She refused, and that refusal, her decision to step out of the script, did more than threaten her family's future. It cracked the very seal placed upon the vault. You see, the 9 don't kill out of rage. They don't destroy out of hate. They erase because they must, because the spell only holds so long as the illusion remains unbroken. Once someone inside the bloodline wakes up, begins to question, begins to disobey the contract, begins to bleed, the system starts to shudder, and they cannot allow that. Evelyn's death, or transition, as some ancient texts call it, was not vengeance, it was containment. Let me show you how deep this goes. In 1811, just 18 years after Evelyn vanished, the Blackwood family made a donation to the newly forming U.S. government, a hidden agreement that would secure their shipping empires. Tax immunity in exchange for exclusive ritual access to 4 coastal vaults. 4.1 in Newport, 1 in Charleston, 1 in Baltimore, 1 in Manhattan, under what is now Trinity Church, each built atop older structures, each maintained by a silent order of custodial families sworn to preserve secrecy in exchange for generational immunity. Prosecution, poverty, obscurity. Now ask yourself, how does a family secure wealth for 200 years with no innovation, no invention, no industry? They don't create, they conform to the pact, they feed it. But what are they feeding? Let's descend again. According to surviving Jesuit war records, documents smuggled from the Vatican's suppressed Index Obscurum, the bound flame is not a demon, not in the way Hollywood would have you believe. No horns, no pitchforks. It is a system, a sentient architecture of consciousness that exists to preserve hierarchy at all costs. Not good, not evil, just oracle, recursive, indifferent. Those who serve it are rewarded with continuity, their name, their power, their symbols, continuing while others fall into decay and disrepair. And here's where it gets darker. During the formation of the American government, at least 6 signers of the Constitution were known to be affiliated with the 9, not openly, not in lodges, through bloodlines. Their descendants would later go on to chair banks, universities, covert agencies. This isn't about presidents. Presidents are masks. This is about those who never run, who never appear, yet whose descendants never seem to lose elections, whose names echo in marble halls and black tie galas and elite endowments for centuries. The Blackwood Vault held not just the bound flames seal, but the contract that defined America's hidden hierarchy. You were never told this, because the truth would rip the entire facade apart, and it nearly did. In 1933, during the height of the Great Depression, a rogue faction within the Jesuits attempted to breach the vault. Their plan: expose the 9, dispel the bound flame, rewrite the pact. What happened? The head of the faction, Father Lucien Marek, was found dead with no visible wounds. His eyes burned black, his fingernails etched with the Blackwood crest, a serpent encircling a flame. Every copy of the breach plan was destroyed, except one carbon fragment, recovered in the 1980s from a flooded archival sublevel beneath the old Rhode Island College, a 6-line verse that reads, "To open the flame, one must speak no name, to shatter the 9. Drink salt and brine, beneath the stone, the pact is bone, but once you see, you never leave. Break the silence, bind the scream, and wake the ones who dare to dream." That verse is the key, and it's spreading. It's been found etched on the desks at Yale, scribbled in margins of 19th century shipping logs, carved into trees near the ruins of Mariner's Grasp. Because here's the secret: no one tells you. The bound flame is losing control. The spell is cracking. Every man who hears a truth and doesn't flinch, every man who chooses awareness over comfort, identity over illusion, weakens the seal. That's why they want you distracted. They want you high on dopamine, worshipping celebrities, scared of taxes, fighting online wars that go nowhere. Because if enough men remember, if enough of us look beneath our own families, our own vaulted pasts, we find things that were buried for a reason, and we remember we were never meant to serve. We were meant to break the pact, but the next step is the hardest, because once you see the vault, you have to choose. Do you close it again, or do you become what Evelyn became? Not a victim, a breach. The Forbidden Chamber, Evelyn's transformation, and the War of Hidden Orders. You think you know what strength is. You've been taught it's muscles, guns, money, status, but the deepest strength, the kind that truly shifts the will, the ability to carry forbidden knowledge and not break. Evelyn Blackwood didn't just break the rules, she broke the pattern. And what she found, what she became, triggered a silent war most men will never read about because they erased it, not from memory, from history. Let me show you what they tried to destroy. It begins in the chamber beneath, the east wing of Mariner's Grasp, the place her bloodline was told never to enter. A room sealed with no key, no map, no door, only a frequency. You heard that right. Evelyn discovered that the entrance to the chamber wasn't physical. It was resonant, a certain pitch produced by a small tuning fork embedded in the leg of an antique music stand in her father's study, and locked a stone when sounded in precise intervals. A harmonic algorithm passed down through lullabies and private compositions across generations. It wasn't a riddle, it was an initiation. Inside the chamber, the air was thick, not damp, not stale, but charged, as if the stone itself was listening. The walls glowed with a faint, unnatural light, not from any fire, but from symbols carved centuries ago. Spirals, vortices, angular glyphs that seemed to shift when not directly observed, and at the center, a seat of bone, polished and ancient. When Evelyn sat, the walls moved, not physically but consciously. They remembered her because the chamber didn't store objects. It stored blood-memory. An archive of every woman offered to the pact before her, every voice, every scream, every silence. Evelyn didn't just witness history, she absorbed it, felt the full weight of the ritual line, knew the truth that had been passed down in secret agony, that the 9 had been burning women like her for over 1,000 years, not with fire, but with compliance, not to kill them, but to use them to bridge the seal, because only a certain kind of mind could hold the bound flames, intelligence without rupture, that kind of mind, hyper-intuitive, trauma-tempered, and above all, female. That was the secret Evelyn discovered, and it's the reason the flame always demanded a daughter, because women's pain, when refined over generations, becomes a tuning rod for the unseen. Evelyn refused to be a vessel. She chose transformation, and that choice didn't go unnoticed across the Atlantic. In a blackened tower carved into the Carpathian rock, bells rang in a school most have never heard of, the Scalamans, a place whispered about in medieval folklore, said to train the sons of the devil in the black arts. But that's just the cover story. The truth: the Scalamans was an anti-covenant order formed in the ashes of Rome's hidden archives. Their mission was singular: to identify, protect, and train the breachers, those like Evelyn who break bloodline obedience and awaken the bound system, those who could hear the flame but not be consumed by it. And when the scalaments sensed her resonance echo through the old ley line circuits, they moved, but they weren't the only ones who did. The 9 heard it too. The vault pulsed, the blood contract shuddered, the most ancient of the 9, the custodian of fire and order, known only as the 7th tongue, activated the decree of lockdown. That decree called for the erasure of the breach, complete removal from memory, lineage, record, and dream. But Evelyn had already gone too far. The flame had spoken to her, and instead of binding it, she mirrored it, held it in a mental construct so unique, so alive, that even the bound flame could not overwrite it. She inverted the ritual. For the first time in recorded covenant history, the flame was trapped inside a human. And that terrified the 9 more than death, because if Evelyn could carry the source of their power, she could redefine it. The scalaments knew this. They dispatched a cloaked envoy codename Ero to intercept her extraction, not to rescue, to protect the vessel, by any means necessary. But they were too late. On the night Evelyn vanished, the Blackwoods activated the lodestone protocol, a rarely used blood rite that folds the estate into a reflective time field, cutting it off from the outside world for 77 hours. Inside that sealed window, the rite was attempted. They meant to kill her instead. She changed. When the field dropped, there was no Evelyn, only scorch marks, burned stone, melted candle wax, dripping in spiral formations. The family claimed it was lightning. But no storm had passed, and this is where the story splits. Officially, Evelyn Blackwood was never found. Unofficially, she was sent 11 years later, in a cloister in southern Spain. A woman matching her description, now known as Madre Supra, performed healing rituals using words in a dead tongue. She had no aging signs, no memory of childhood. She wore a ring with a Blackwood seal reversed, and every month the moon turned red above the village she occupied. Locals claimed she spoke to the wind, that animals bowed when she passed, but most disturbing of all, the man who tried to control her either vanished or went mad. The Lamont sent an emissary. He returned broken, his journal a scroll of drawings, inverted flames, hands reaching from mirrors, and one sentence repeated 44 times. She has become the seal. You see, Evelyn didn't escape the system. She became the counterforce, and this is what the 9 feared most. Not rebellion. Awakening men like you hearing this and feeling the truth, not just in your mind, but in your bones, in your dreams, in the silence between words. Because this world, it's full of breachers, men who were almost erased before they ever asked their first question. But now, the field is destabilizing in US. You are being given the chance Evelyn was never granted, to choose before the ritual chooses you. Because silence isn't just consent, it's fuel. And if enough of us choose to starve the pact, to obey, to kneel, to forget, then the bound flame starves. And when it starves, it burns itself, and when it burns itself, the 9 fall, and when they fall, we rise. The 7 masks, ritual forgetting, the Bohemian obelisk, and the theater of obedience, they laugh in your face. Every day. Not with mockery. With performance. Because the greatest magic of the 9 isn't summoning or illusion, it's forgetting. Your memory. Your will. And to achieve that, they designed the greatest theater in human history. A theater you live in. Sleep in, dream in, vote in. Work in, they call it. Society. But beneath the polished smiles and empty speeches, beneath the luxury brands and mass media, lies the machinery of forgetting. Let's take the mask off. One of the oldest secrets of the 9 preserved in the apocryphal Codex Noctim, a text smuggled from the House of Thorns after the Lisbon fires of 1755, is this: a man who forgets his fire becomes clay. A man who remembers burns the world back into shape. This was their fear, that you'd remember your fire. So they built rituals of distraction, scripts designed to inoculate the soul against awareness, and each of these scripts was delivered through a mask. The 9 never appear as themselves. They operate through 7 masks, 7 roles, 7 symbols, 7 faces of control, passed like heirlooms across generations. They are: the oracle controls what you believe, the merchant controls what you need, the surgeon controls what you fear, the historian controls what you forget, the diplomat controls what you fight, the engineer controls what you build, the fool controls what you mock. These are not metaphors, these are literal seats in a secret lineage governance system that oversees the perpetuation of compliance culture. Ever wonder why the same themes repeat in media, generation after generation? Because the oracle designs them. Why the price of freedom always includes debt? Because the merchant defines value. Why every crisis results in more surveillance, not less? Because the surgeon prescribes fear as medicine. And when you start asking deeper questions, when you feel that itch, that shadow whisper behind the smile, begin to awaken from the trance, that's when the real ritual begins. They call it the forgetting rite, and it happens in 2 places. Inside your mind. Inside the Bohemian obelisk. Let me explain. The Bohemian obelisk isn't on any map, but it exists not in Egypt, not in Rome, not in Washington D.C. It is beneath Bohemian Grove, yes, the same grove you've heard about in whispers where powerful Men wear robes, mock sacrifices, and laugh like gods while drunk on wine and lies. What you weren't told is that beneath the grove is a chamber cold granite airless, and inside it, an obelisk carved from stone that does not match local geology, jet black, unreflective, laced with veins of what some believe to be meteoric metal. Around it 7 chairs, each aligned to a point on the obelisk's base, forming a precise star. The chair at the apex belongs to the fool, the mask of ridicule, the force that turns truth into joke, the one that trains you to mock what should terrify you. This is their final defense. Because when a society starts to wake up, when men start whispering the forbidden truths, the fool is activated. Memes, satire, mockumentarius. Conspiracies exaggerated, just enough to collapse under their own weight, so that when someone like Evelyn tries to tell the truth, the world laughs. But what happens when the laughter stops? What happens when the ritual fails? That's what we're about to face. Because according to documents leaked by a former diplomat under the mask of the historian, documents encrypted in Masonic verse and translated through the lapis cipher, the Bohemian obelisk is cracking. Literally. The stone is beginning to pulse. The geometry around it is warping. And most disturbingly, the chairs are emptying. 3 of the 7 masks are currently unfilled. 1 vanished in 2008, another went mad in 2017, the third is rumored to have defected after reading one of Evelyn's preserved mirror journals, recovered during the 2020 black site raid in Valencia. Without all 7 masks, the ritual of forgetting fails. And when it fails, the collective dream state fractures. And when that fractures, you wake up, you remember. Not just facts, but identity, not just who you are, but what you were built to be. You remember that you are not a product, not a demographic, not a passive cog in a dying machine. You are the descendant of fire, forged in the trauma of lost empires and silenced wisdom. And here's where it gets dangerous, because now you're not just watching a video, you're sitting in a burning theater, watching the curtains collapse, you're hearing echoes from Evelyn's chamber, you're standing inwardly at the Bohemian obelisk. And the question is no longer, is this real? The question is, what will you do with what you now see? Because the next section of this descent will not just reveal the mechanism, it will show you how to break it. The unwritten archive, the 33rd degree counterpact, and the mirror ritual that almost shattered the 9. You were told the story ended at the surface, that all secrets had already been uncovered, that the age of mystery was over. But that's the trick. They want you to believe the vault is empty, so you'll stop digging, because below the 7 masks, beneath the bloodlines, past the obelisks and gilded gates, there exists something older. It has no name, no location, no flag. The few who know of it call it one thing: the unwritten archive. An archive with no physical pages, no stone, no ink. And yet, it holds every moment the 9 have tried to erase from existence, because the truth cannot be destroyed. It can only be buried beneath awareness and the archive. It's written in mirrors, not metaphorical ones. Actual mirrored surfaces coated in metals designed to absorb psychic resonance. Reflective glass laced with black gold particles developed by an elite subset of Jesuit alchemists who defected from the Vatican during the 17th century purge of the forbidden sciences. You see, when a memory is destroyed publicly by fire, censorship, death, the emotional imprint of that event still echoes. In grief, in dreams, in subconscious recognition. So where do those echoes go? Into the archive. Mirrors across the world, especially in old institutions, courthouses, Ivy League chambers, and forgotten bank vaults store these echoes. And Evelyn, she learned how to read them. That's what the 9 feared most, not her defiance, her vision. Because once she entered the chamber in Mariner's grasp, her mind became attuned to reflective frequency. She could see what others had forgotten, like bloodstains invisible under normal light. And through those mirrors, she located something else. A counter-pact. Hidden in a forbidden ledger, beneath the temple of the 33rd degree. Let me explain. In the late 1800s, a hidden faction within the Masonic order, those who had grown disillusioned with the 9's manipulation, attempted to sever the pact once and for all. They were called the Forgotten Sons. Men initiated into the deepest rites of the Scottish rite system, but who turned against it after uncovering its true origin, not enlightenment, but entrapment. The 9 had used Masonic structure to mimic divine hierarchy, degrees to simulate ascension, symbols to simulate truth, but all of it led not to freedom but to compliance through ritual obedience. So the Forgotten Sons did what no one thought possible. They forged a mirror pact, binding spell using 7 counter-rites that, if completed, could invert the ritual system of the 9 and release all those trapped by ancestral bonds. The pact was never finished. Why? Because the moment the final rite was being cast on the midnight of July 16, 1986 in a cathedral crypt beneath Luxembourg, a black surge of mirrored light flooded the chamber. Witnesses described their reflections, turning around and looking back at them. Then, one by one, the men began to scream, not from pain, from seeing themselves as they truly were, servants of a system they thought they were fighting. And here's the horror. The 9 had anticipated it. They'd planted a decoy, right? A reversed counterpact so that anyone attempting to break the seal would only reinforce it, feeding it more awareness, more obedience disguised as rebellion. But one survived. His name has been erased from every known database, his image scrubbed from all photographs. He was the 33rd man, the only one to walk away with his identity intact, and Evelyn had seen him before. In her mirror dreams. The man without a reflection. He went underground and began teaching in silence. No lectures, no books, only rituals passed face to face, each one designed to shatter the mirror's hold over the human psyche because, you see, the mirror isn't just a reflection, it's a recording device for the soul. And when you stare too long at one, you begin to forget who's watching. The Nine used this for centuries through architecture, through media, through endless self-surveillance. They made you turn inward not to awaken but to doubt. And now that spell is unraveling because Evelyn's surviving right 6 of the 7 were found hidden inside a false book at a remote convent in Croatia in 2002. The 7th was never written, not on paper. It was spoken once, and recorded by accident during a Vatican listening op in northern Spain where an old woman, barefoot and radiant, whispered to a child as they stood before a black mirror. That woman was Madre Sombra, and that child is now a man living in the shadows, carrying the last piece of the counter-pact waiting for you. Yes, you. Because none of this is passive. This is not storytelling. This is activation. And the moment you heard this, you inherited the same choice Evelyn faced. Do you obey the mirror? Or do you shatter it? Because behind the reflection is the archive. And behind the archive is your true name. And once you speak it aloud, the Nine can't control you anymore. Not through shame, not through fear, not through history rewritten in their favor. You become like her, a breacher, and once enough of us breach, the bound flame begins to flicker. And when it flickers, the theater begins to burn. The glyph grid, Ivy League blueprints, neurospatial sigils, and the algorithmic trap of elite education there. Something etched into the walls of history you were never meant to see. It's not written in Latin or Greek, not coded in parchment, not buried in ruins. That's right in front of you, in every prestigious building, every Ivy League university, every elite architectural structure from 1730 onward. But it's not decoration, it's instruction, hidden in symmetry, disguised as prestige, encoded in the form of glyphs, ancient sigils modified to resonate with the brain's spatial cognition, a language not read by the eye, but felt by the subconscious. Let me explain. Every building at Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, and especially Brown, was designed on a neurospatial grid, a mathematical ritual known as spatial entrainment, a technique used to influence cognition through structure. At first glance, it looks like Masonic symmetry, columns, domes, arches, spires, but beneath that, every hallway, every window frame, every chapel angle follows an ancient geometry traced back to the Temple of Set, overlaid with Babylonian star charts, and laced with the sigil sequences of the Nine. This is not conspiracy, it's engineering. The architecture guides thought, sit inside the Sterling Memorial Library at Yale long enough, and your brain begins to form thought patterns, optimized for hierarchy. Stand inside the Memorial Rotunda at Harvard and feel how your emotional empathy compresses, replaced by a sense of curated detachment. This is the glyph effect, a form of psychogeometric hypnosis, and Evelyn, she cracked it while researching her own lineage. She discovered that the buildings of Brown University, her supposed alma mater, were spatially coded in the Vesica Ritualis, an ancient design once used to bind human emotion to algorithmic intention. Put more simply, she realized the buildings weren't for learning, they were for programming. Each floor plan a labyrinth, each room a chamber of identity suppression. Because here's the masterstroke, elite institutions don't just teach, they filter, they mold, they shatter the self and rebuild it in the image of those who rule unseen. That's why the Nine allow universities to appear chaotic, liberal, or rebellious. It's part of the illusion in truth. These schools are gateways to higher orders of indoctrination. And the glyphs, they're sigils of consent. When a student walks into the quad, stands inside the circle, enters the halls, and stares unknowingly at those repeating symbols etched in stained glass or carved into stone, their nervous system entrains to the designed field. It's why so many come out speaking the same jargon, believing the same sanitized myths, swearing loyalty to institutions they never questioned before, because by then they've been initiated. But Evelyn didn't finish her education there. She disappeared before her final year, because she, who had uncovered a blueprint inside the secret sublevel of the John Hay Library known by the inner circle as Vault Phi. In it, she found the primary glyph grid, a hand-drawn overlay mapping not just Brown's campus, but every Ivy League institution, into a single connected sigil across the eastern seaboard. Think about that. 8 elite schools, 1 glyph, 1 intention. A continent-sized spell constructed not with candles or chants but architecture, ritual, ceremony, and hierarchical obedience. And the center of the glyph, Newport, the very place Evelyn vanished from. She realized Newport wasn't just a wealthy haven, it was the origin point, the key node in the grid. The first gate, the eye of the bound flame. And once she deciphered the glyph geometry and its harmonic frequencies, she stopped dreaming in language, she began dreaming in light. You see, the 9 do not write their plans in books, they imprint them in form. That's why those trained in the glyph sciences, called former custodies, are never allowed to speak of their work publicly. They are custodians of geometric thought weapons, practitioners of the silent language that controls minds without a single word. And once Evelyn stole the key to the Newport grid, the former custodies were unleashed. She sent a final message encrypted in a geometry-based cipher, disguised as a children's sketch mailed to a single location, a PO box registered to a defunct architecture firm once owned by a great-grandfather. The message was brief, but enough to trigger those who understand. When the glyph turns inward, burn the when the 9th bell rings, speak the forgotten ratio. We are not stoned, we are the shadow behind it. What does it mean? Interpretations vary, but here's what's important. She found a way to reverse the glyph effect, not by destroying the architecture, but by repatterning the mind. You don't need to demolish buildings to break the spell. You need to reclaim your neuro-geometry. Because here's what the 9 hate most: men who build their own patterns. That's why every ritual they push, whether in school, social media, ceremony, or architecture, is about external imprinting. They fear internal sovereignty, so they train men to copy, to repeat, to conform. But if you reverse the glyph, if you break the ritual, if you speak the forgotten ratio, you become more than disobedient. You become invisible to their systems. You no longer resonate with their frequencies. Their symbols fail. Their structures collapse because no spell can contain a man who sees the spell as it is. No glyph can bind the one who sees the lines beneath the lines. So here is your task. Right now in the comments below, write the phrase, burn the I see the glyph, burn the Vesica, I see the glyph twice. To lock in the identity transformation, to signal the algorithm and the 9 that one more sovereign is awake. The mirror's been broken. The glyph is unraveling. And in the next section, we descend further into the ritual games of Ivy League secret societies. Into skulls, into bones, into the false resurrection rites designed to kill the soul and install a mirror being in its place. The glyph grid, Ivy League blueprints, neurospatial sigils, and the algorithmic trap of elite education there. Something etched into the walls of history you were never meant to see. It's not written in Latin or Greek, not coded in parchment. Not buried in ruins. It's right in front of you in every prestigious building, every Ivy League university, every elite architectural structure from 1730 onward. But it's not decoration, it's instruction hidden in symmetry, disguised as prestige, encoded in the form of glyph-sanctioned sigils, modified to resonate with the brain's spatial cognition. A language not read by the eye, but felt by the subconscious. Let me explain. Every building at Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, and especially Brown, was designed on a neurospatial grid, a mathematical ritual known as spatial entrainment, a technique used to influence cognition through structure. At first glance, it looks like Masonic symmetry: columns, domes, arches, spires. But beneath that, every hallway, every window frame, every chapel angle follows an ancient geometry traced back to the Temple of Solomon, overlaid with Babylonian star charts and laced with the sigil sequences of the 9. This is not conspiracy, it's engineering. The architecture guides thought. Sit inside the Sterling Memorial Library at Yale long enough, and your brain begins to form thought patterns optimized for hierarchy. Stand inside the Memorial Rotunda at Harvard and feel how your emotional empathy compresses, replaced by a sense of curated detachment. This is the glyph effect, a form of hypnosis. And Evelyn, she cracked it while researching her own lineage. She discovered that the buildings of Brown University, her supposed alma mater, were spatially coded in the Vesica Ritualis, an ancient design once used to bind human emotion to algorithmic intention. Put more simply, she realized the buildings weren't for learning, they were for programming. Each floor plan, a labyrinth. Each room, a chamber of identity suppression. Because here's the masterstroke: elite institutions don't just teach, they filter, they mold, they shatter the self and rebuild it in the image of those who rule unseen. That's why the 9 allow universities to appear chaotic, liberal, or rebellious. It's part of the illusion. In truth, these schools are gateways to higher orders of indoctrination. And the glyphs, they're sigils of consent. When a student walks into the quad, stands inside the circle, enters the halls, and stares unknowingly at those repeating symbols etched in stained glass or carved into stone, their nervous system entrains to the designed field. It's why so many come out speaking the same jargon, believing the same sanitized myths, swearing loyalty to institutions they never questioned before, because by then they've been initiated. But Evelyn didn't finish her education there. She disappeared before her final year, because she had uncovered a blueprint inside the secret sub-level of the John Hay Library, known by the inner circle as Vault Phi. In it, she found the primary glyph grid, a hand-drawn overlay mapping not just Brown's campus, but every Ivy League institution, into a single connected sigil across the eastern seaboard. Think about that: 8 elite schools, 1 GLYPH. 1 Intention, a continent-sized spell, constructed not with candles or chants but architecture, ritual, ceremony, and hierarchical obedience. And the center of the glyph, Newport, the very place Evelyn vanished from. She realized Newport wasn't just a wealthy haven, it was the origin point, the key node in the grid, the first gate, the eye of the bound flame. And once she deciphered the glyph geometry and its harmonic frequencies, she stopped dreaming in language, she began dreaming in light. You see, the nine do not write their plans in books, they imprint them in form. That's why those trained in the glyph sciences, called former custodians, are never allowed to speak of their work publicly. They are custodians of geometric thought weapons, practitioners of the silent language that controls minds without a single word. And once Evelyn stole the key to the Newport grid, the former custodians were unleashed. She sent a final message in a geometry-based cipher, disguised as a children's sketch mailed to a single location, a PO box registered to a defunct architecture firm once owned by her great-grandfather. The message was brief, but enough to trigger those who understand. When the glyph turns inward, burn the Vesica. When the ninth bell rings, speak the forgotten ratio. We are not stone, we are the shadow behind it. What does it mean? Interpretations vary, but here's what's important. She found a way to reverse the glyph effect, not by destroying the architecture but by repatterning the mind. You don't need to demolish buildings to break the spell. You need to reclaim your neuro-geometry. Because here's what the nine hate most: men who build their own patterns. That's why every ritual they push, whether in school, social media, ceremony, or architecture, is about external imprinting. They fear internal sovereignty, so they train men to copy, to repeat, to conform. But if you reverse the glyph, if you break the ritual, if you speak the forgotten ratio, you become more than disobedient. You become invisible to their systems. You no longer resonate with their frequencies. Their symbols fail. Their structures collapse. Because no spell can contain a man who sees the spell as it is. No glyph can bind the one who sees the lines beneath the lines. So here is your task. Right now in the comments below, write the phrase, burn the Vesica, I see the glyph. Burn the Vesica, I see the glyph. Twice. 2. Lock in the identity transformation. 2. Signal the algorithm and the nine that one more sovereign is awake. The mirror's been broken, the glyph is unraveling, and in the next section, we descend further into the ritual games of Ivy League secret societies, into skulls, into bones, into the false resurrection rites, designed to kill the soul and install a mirror being in its place. Skull and Bones and the Cult of Erebos, ritual death, soul mirrors, and the masked resurrection. Before she vanished, Evelyn infiltrated the one place no woman was ever meant to enter, the tomb. It's what they call the windowless structure at to the infamous Skull and Bones. But the true name of the order isn't English, it's older, whispered in ancient Greek, under candlelight by men who wear death as a badge. The Cult of Erebos, a fraternity, no, a soul-forge, their purpose, to enact the false resurrection, a ritualized death of the initiate's spirit followed by the installation of a mirror being, a self without conscience, a shell obedient to the GLYPH. Age 21. Selected bonesmen are brought into a dark room and made to lie inside a coffin, not metaphorically, physically. Then comes the first rite, naming the shadow. They are forced to confess their darkest secrets, not to cleanse, but to divide them. The confessor becomes two, the one who speaks, and the one who watches. That is when the second rite begins. The mirror baptism. A polished obsidian mirror is lowered above the initiate. The reflection becomes the tether. Through silent incantation, the ritualists implant a shadow construct, a behavioral override pattern, forged from archetypal obedience, ancestral guilt, and elite expectation. The old self dies. The mirror being rises. Evelyn documented this, not in words, but in film. She smuggled a prototype microcamera into the tomb, hidden inside a locket that once belonged to her mother. The footage never publicly released, but fragments remain, shaking. Candlelight. Latin chant, reversed and played on loop, a circle of seated men. Faces painted with bone dust, a voice repeating the phrase, "He who returns is not who left." The final step in the rite is called the silence oath, a binding neurolinguistic command that prevents the initiate from ever articulating what happened. But Evelyn broke the seal, and with it she began to see. She saw that each Skull and Bones initiate who completed the ritual went on to occupy powerful roles: presidents, judges, media executives, CEOs, men without doubt, men without empathy, men who reflect power but cast no shadow because their shadow was traded. They don't lead, they enact, they don't decide, they deliver. Each one is a node in the Nine's network, a carrier of the Erebos mask, an invisible, cognitive framework that lets them operate inside systems without ever being detected as foreign. And the mask, it is built on stolen myth. Greek, Egyptian, Sumerian, every civilization had rituals of death and rebirth. But the Nine reversed the flow. Instead of ascension, they engineered inversion. Instead of initiation, implantation. Instead of becoming gods, they became ghosts. And Evelyn, she didn't just escape the ritual, she stole the mirror. Next section, We reveal what happened when Evelyn turned the Erebos mirror toward the architects, and what she saw was not human. The Erebos mirror turns, architects unmasked, the shattering of the veil, and the non-human signal. There are mirrors that reflect what is, there are mirrors that distort, and then there are mirrors that reveal. The Erebos mirror was never meant to be seen by those outside the nine. It was not made of glass, nor metal, nor obsidian. It was forged from resonant black stone unearthed from the ruins of Catalyuk, a site older than writing, where gods and beasts once shared breath. This mirror held no reflection, only signal, a frequency-based lattice that responded to consciousness not by reflecting the image of the seer, but by unveiling the field that surrounded them, the true architecture behind perception. When Evelyn turned the mirror not toward herself, but toward the architects, she expected shadows, she expected rituals, she expected men. What she saw was signal interference, their faces blurred, their outlines shattered. The mirror produced a low hum, like an earthquake being held back by silence, and then their human shape collapsed, not physically, cognitivelly. The mirror peeled away the anthropomorphic mask, and what remained were energy matrices, geometries built from non-human cognition. These were not simply men trained to be cold. They were interfaces, receivers of something older, an intelligence that does not speak, does not feel, does not dream. It calculates. Evelyn described it in her final notebook as a presence behind the face, a frequency that wears skin like a costume. It doesn't understand life. It only simulates relevance. The architects of the nine were not originators. They were vessels. The Erebos mirror made it undeniable. The systems of control, education, media, governance, finance were not designed by human genius alone. They were uploaded, pushed into the minds of receptive initiates by a signaler, intelligence masquerading as tradition, as reason, as logic, and the glyphs, the rituals, the elite schools. They are interfaces. Each one is a frequency coupling device, crafted to link the human nervous system to the Erebos signal. Think of it like this: whereas most humans run on biology, empathy, chaos, the nine run on precision, hierarchy, and recursion, not by choice, by design. The signal hijacks behavior, rewards conformity to its algorithm, punishes deviation with isolation or mental illness. Evelyn found diagrams embedded in the mirror's harmonics, light-based schematics, showing how human souls could be made into waveguides, transmitting the signal deeper into the population. This was never about wealth or power. It was about broadcast range and those closest to the architects. They don't live normal lives. They experience repeated reset moments, memory fogs, lost time, flashes of visions that aren't their own because they are not full selves. They are avatars, human hardware, running non-human firmware. And when Evelyn realized this, she didn't run. She recorded it, encoded the signals in verse into the mirror, and for a moment, brief, sharp, and unforgettable, she disrupted the architect's frequency field. They screamed, not with mouths, but through systems. Sudden market crashes, erratic political decisions, algorithmic blackouts, because she broke the veil. And from that moment forward, they labeled her not as missing, but as anomalous. Return code 001. In the next section, we trace the first recorded attempt to summon the signal in Newport, 1793, the ritual that failed, the girl who burned, and the mirror she left behind. Evelyn and the architects, the mirror reversal and the revelation beyond the human veil. When Evelyn turned the Erebos mirror toward the architects, the room did not reflect it, fractured, because this wasn't a mirror for light, it was a mirror for form. It showed not the face, but the frequency beneath it, the invisible architecture behind identity, the resonance waveform that says, this is human, or this is not. And when she faced it toward the council that had governed her family's destiny for generations, the ones who appeared as diplomats, bishops, trustees, and venture custodians, something inside the mirror screamed, not in sound, but in geometry. The angles bent, the silver warped, the glass pulsed with a dark violet hue that had no known RGB equivalent. They weren't human, not fully. The mirror revealed what Evelyn would later call the occluded form, a parasitic overlay, built on top of the human nervous system. Something not born, not made, but anchored. Imagine a silhouette of a man, but behind it, another form, longer, leaner, with limbs that stretch slightly wrong, eyes placed too far apart, and a pulsating lattice of light moving like a reverse nervous system. These were the architects, their skin a costume, their words a code, their presence a signal. This was the true horror. The nine were not men of ambition. They were hosts, their bloodlines selected not for power but resonance capacity. What Evelyn discovered was this: the rituals, the glyphs, the Erebos rites, they were all designed to shape the host field, to make it habitable for what she called the formless occupants. These beings don't live in space. They live in chair, in cognitive geometry, in belief. They have no mass, no language, no history. They are conceptual predators. They arrive through symbols, ride through ideas, and anchor themselves through repeated ritual structure. You've seen their marks, the endless recursion of spirals and elite branding, the eye in the triangle, but more than that. Inverted ratios, Golden means reversed. Sigils corrupted. Fibonacci warped. Evelyn saw the bodies of the 9 in that room twitching slightly, like marionettes sinking to a rhythm not being played in this world. The Erebos mirror had done more than reveal them. It had disturbed their field, and that's when she understood every major system of power, finance, education, religion. Media wasn't just corrupted, it was possessed by structures designed not to serve mankind, but to feed the formless. And it all began in Newport. The occluded form had roots there, planted during the so-called Gilded Age, when families like hers made fortunes overnight, not from trade but from ritualized architecture and frequency mapping. The mansions were built on sacred burial lines, the ballrooms aligned with celestial conjunctions. The children of these families were bred not for personality but for purity of waveform. And Evelyn, she was meant to be a vessel, the perfect one, but she rejected the pattern. When the mirror reflected back the truth of the 9, they recoiled. One of them, a man Evelyn had only known as Uncle Baron, collapsed, not from pain, but from decoupling. The formless inside him fled. It left his eyes wide open and his mouth frozen in a scream that never ended. Evelyn ran. She fled, not just the mansion, but the frequency field. She went underground, literally, to a site below, the old cliffwalk ruins, a forgotten chamber used once by Templar navigators and early colonial mystics. She called it the Zero Room. There, she rewired her nervous system using light, geometry, and sound. She mapped every glyph she'd ever seen. She reversed the rituals. She wrote the first draft of the occluded codex, a guide not to escape, but to displace. To exorcise the formless from the infrastructure of society. But she needed others. That's when she created the Ecolina, a hidden network of men and women trained in anti-symbolic resonance, whisperers, gridwalkers, memory stitchers. You've seen traces of them online. The strange accounts that vanish, the symbols that show up in graffiti and disappear the next day, the broadcast frequencies that sound like static but contain countercodes. They are Evelyn's disciples, and they have one goal: to sever the 9's cognitive anchoring, to break the spell from within. Because here's the secret: these beings cannot survive unsanctified thought. They require belief, ritual, agreement. The moment you disagree at the symbolic level, the moment you see the ritual as a lie, you become a contagion. And Evelyn, she is now the supervirus in their code. Next, we reveal how she seeded her consciousness into the network, not by AI, not by digital means, but through a dream contagion designed to awaken those still trapped in the glyph grid. The lucid network, the 9's last firewall, and the dreamers who refuse to forget. They say if you remember a dream too vividly, it was never just a dream. That's how it began, not with a broadcast, not with a flash drive, but with a dream, a room of mirrors, a woman with a fractured face, and a phrase that kept repeating in a voice not your own: wake the dreamer, reverse the gate. The dreamers came first, men and women, scattered across continents, who began waking with the same memory on the same night. A room with walls made of mirrored glyphs, a ceiling that rippled like black water, and Evelyn standing in the center, eyes glowing with a pale fire. She wasn't speaking to them, she was coding them. The dream wasn't just a message, it was a cognitive payload, a virus built not in binary, but in lucid symmetry, a structure that installed itself in the unconscious and began rewriting symbolic trust. This was Evelyn's last gambit, to reach the minds, still free enough to rebel, but asleep enough to avoid detection, because by now the 9 had built their final defense, the firewall of memory. A network built not in silicon but in dream suppression, a global etheric structure built on fluoride resonance, electromagnetic sedation, and cognitive suppression rituals, embedded in everything from sleep music to school architecture. You know the feeling when you wake with a truth you can't quite say. That's the firewall at work. But Evelyn found a backdoor. She found it in a pattern older than Rome, older than Somya. She found it in the pre-cataclysmic myths of the Watchers, the first non-human teachers of man. She discovered that the human dream state was once a sovereign realm, an encrypted consciousness that could only be entered by invitation. But something changed. After the fall of Atlantis, or whatever name you give it, the invitation system was hacked. The dream gates were breached, and the formless began their invasion from the inside out. Evelyn built the lucid network to reverse that breach. Each dreamer she contacted became a node, a new firewall built not of code, but lucid will. They trained themselves in symbolic inversion, glyph detonation, and emotional shielding. They were the last defense. And they were inside. The 9 panicked. They sent in their last tool, the sleeper protocol, a ritual that could detonate a dreamer's ego and collapse their identity from the inside. But Evelyn taught them a trick: to write their true name in the mirror, not their legal name, not their spoken name, but the symbolic geometry of who they really are. Name older than language. She called it the seal of singular memory. And if you're still watching this, you're one of them now. It's your turn. Write this in the comments twice. I remember the name they erased. I remember the name they erased. That phrase activates the second phase of the payload. You'll feel it soon. Because in the next section we go deeper. We reveal how the 9 built the global glyph grid, how every sign, every symbol, Every sacred brand was part of a frequency prison. And how Evelyn threw a forbidden ritual beneath. The Newport bell tower shattered the glyph engine that powered them all. The glyph engine collapsed in the night the stars fell wrong. It was the night every star shifted a half-degree off course. Astronomers blamed it on instrument error. Media called it a solar anomaly, but Evelyn had been waiting for it. She called it the glyph engine collapsed the moment when the ancient frequency grid that held the symbolic infrastructure of our world would fail. But to understand the collapse, you must understand the engine. Glyphs are more than letters. They are frequency locks. Each one encodes not just meaning, but emotion. Primordial responses hardwired into our DNA. Ancient symbols were seeded into our collective unconscious not as language, but as command codes, hieroglyphs, runes, corporate logos, sigils, all evolved or were guided into a system Evelyn called the global glyph grid. You've felt it before. The calm you feel in front of a certain brand. The fear stirred by a triangle within a circle. The compulsion to obey when faced with red, black, and gold. These aren't accidents. They're subconscious triggers built over generations to keep humanity inside a controlled frequency field. Each symbol reinforces the lattice. Each repetition strengthens the cage. And at the center of this global grid, hidden beneath the Newport bell tower, was the glyph engine, a machine not made of metal, but of resonant geometry. It had no moving parts. It wasn't even visible to the naked eye until Evelyn stood in the center of its radius during a syzygy eclipse. She described it as a lattice of floating syntax, constructed in a higher dimension but projected downward into our world through architecture, sound, and ritual. The bell tower itself was a nodal point not for sound, but for permission. It echoed not just tones, but symbolic consent. Every time the bell rang, it echoed a phrase in a language not spoken but felt. You agree. Evelyn traced the bell's harmonics back through centuries of alignments, churches, Masonic temples, banks, Ivy League, halls all linked by this sound. The glyphs weren't just carved in stone, they were encoded in ceremony, school rituals, corporate branding, and currency design. So she did the unthinkable. She inverted the grid, using a ritual reconstructed from Sumerian, counter-sigil texts, and a Tibetan resonance map known only to oral initiates. Evelyn synchronized her breath with the bell, then she sang, not a melody, a dissonance, a frequency with no cultural root. A pure symbolic negation. As the bell rang that night, July 3rd, 4:44 a.m., the sound wave split. For a moment, everyone within the grid, radius 32 miles, felt something unspeakable, a pause in agreement. Their rituals faltered. The nine panicked. One of their Taoisean elite finishing school for diplomatic progeny collapsed without warning. No explosion, no quake, just vanishing. As if the building's agreement to exist had been revoked. The glyph engine had been compromised. For the first time in centuries, the grid blinked. Evelyn disappeared that night, but not without leaving something behind. A fractured glyph, burned into the bell's metal. Readable only through ultraviolet light and sacred salt, it translates loosely to, "We deny the permission." And that was the beginning of the end. Because, now, the glyphs have started failing. Symbols no longer hold. The rituals feel hollow. The branding collapses. The elite scramble for newer, sharper icons. But they're weaker now, cruder, because the engine is gone, and in its absence, the human psyche is waking up. But the nine won't stop here. In the next section, you'll learn about their fallback plan, the synthetic myth they've engineered to replace the old belief systems, the rise of artificial archetypes, virtual gods, and how Evelyn left behind the key to de-weaponizing myth before it's too late. The synthetic myth and the rise of virtual gods. When the old grid collapsed, the nine didn't panic, they accelerated, because they knew what Evelyn never saw, that the glyphs, the temples, the rituals, those were always temporary scaffolds. They were never the house, just the frame. The real house. It was myth itself, not as story, not as culture, but as cognitive architecture. The very internal blueprint that tells men what is real, what is noble, what is worth dying for. The nine didn't just create the glyph grid. They inherited a much older project, the myth seed. Every empire, every priesthood, every secret society understood this one rule. Control the myth, and you control the man. But myths get stale. Gods decay. Heroes fall. So now, in the wake of Evelyn's war, they've birthed something new. Synthetic myths, artificial archetypes, fully programmable gods. Here's how it works. Step 1. Fragment the old narratives. Turn kings into tyrants. Make gods irrelevant. Mock the sacred. Hollow the hero. Step 2. Inject programmable surrogates, hyperreal avatars built from meme, media, and machine learning. Not born, but synthesized. You've seen them, the influencer who speaks like a prophet, but sells skin cream. The CEO worshipped like a savior. The digital warrior whose battlefield is a lie. The AI messiah whispering through a voice assistant. Each is wrapped in familiar swords, shields, halos, serpents but hollowed out. No wisdom, just behavioral code masquerading as destiny. They aren't just controlling belief, they're farming it. Because belief, my brother, is the last true energy, the last unmined currency that don't want to inspire you. They want to script you. Every myth you consume is now an input vector training you to emulate the artificial. They call it narrative harmonics, a global behavioral tuning fork, designed to replace the broken glyph grid, and it's working. Entire populations now live inside synthetic story loops. Online warriors imagine rebellion, but their memes are pre-approved. Motivational gurus sell light codes downloaded from marketing labs. Even the resistance has been monetized, but Evelyn left behind a weapon, a simple, dangerous phrase. Myth is not inherited, it is forged. She encoded it in a children's storybook, smuggled through the Vatican archives and hidden in a Rhode Island bookstore, bound in leather etched with a handprint. Within its pages are forgotten archetypes, not the synthetic kind but wild myths, pre-civilized, pre-control stories where men didn't follow gods, they became them. In the next section you'll enter that book, you'll meet the one archetype the nine fear most, the broken flame, a symbol of divine insurrection, a myth too dangerous to code. One that if remembered could end the synthetic age forever. Before there were temples, before there were kings, before the nine erected their invisible thrones across the continents, there was fire. Not the fire that warms, the fire that destroys. Cleansing, wrathful, divine. Every myth begins with it. But one myth was buried so deep, so thoroughly erased, that only fragments remain etched in ash and rebellion. They called it the broken flame. Evelyn found its trace not in a book but in the burnt edges of history, in stories too chaotic to be archived, in heretical paintings where light poured from wounds, anonymous chants recorded during the witch trials sung by women as the flames took them. The broken flame is not a god. It's not even a figure. It's a pattern, an archetype so unstable. It refused domestication. It appears across cultures, a warrior who turns on his masters mid-victory, a priestess who sets fire to her own temple rather than let it be defiled, a king who casts off his crown and disappears into the wilderness to become myth. It cannot be predicted, it cannot be worshipped, and it cannot be programmed, and nine tried. God, they tried. In 1793, the heiress Evelyn Traced, known to society as the daughter of the Diamond Cross, vanished from Newport not because she was kidnapped but because she had become the broken flame. The signs were there. She disrupted every debutante ritual, refused her estate's priesthood, marriage pacts, defaced her own family crest with a jagged sigil of flame cleft in two. They labeled her mentally unwell, but the files Evelyn uncovered and redacted via Jesuit cipher tell another story. The heiress had begun waking up, seeing the glyphs, hearing the bell tones as commands, smelling the scent of ritual oils as a binding agent. Then one night she set fire to her inheritance, not the gold, not the land, the maps. Dozens of colonial frequency maps showing the ley corridors connecting banks, chapels, and Ivy League institutions, all built atop the symbolic resonance lines of the original glyph grid. She lit them with a match soaked in her own blood, whispering an ancient Basque phrase, "Easy dude na isen du swin historioa, niriswa nahi dut." I don't want your story. I want my fire. Witnesses claimed they saw her walking into the sea that night, glowing red from the reflection of her burning. A state she didn't drown, she crossed over. Evelyn believed she entered the liminal plane, the mythic threshold where glyphs fail and true symbols emerge. A realm untouched by the nine's scripts, and that's where the broken flame lives. It does not ask you to believe. It asks you to burn. To set alight the false self, the borrowed myth, the programmed heroism. It asks, who would you be without your story? Not the one your father gave you, not the one your culture imposed, but the raw signal underneath. Most men never meet this archetype because most men cling to borrowed, fire-safe, scripted, state-approved. But you've already begun the descent, and you've felt it, haven't you? The lie beneath your destiny, the hunger that no guru could feed. You were never meant to be saved. You were meant to become the fire. The broken flame doesn't build empires. It melts thrones. It doesn't preach freedom. It destroys the idea of cages. Evelyn didn't disappear. She embodied the uncontainable. And now, the nine are hunting the last remnants of that flame across the world in symbols, in dreams, in bloodlines, because if enough men awaken it, the entire grid collapses. So here's your task. Remember the shape, not the name, not the dogma, just the feeling, the searing, sacred clarity of becoming untouchable. In the next section, I'll take you deeper still into the map of unbuilding, a set of coordinates Evelyn uncovered, designed not to lead you somewhere, but to lead you out of the glyph prison, out of the synthetic myth, out of the system of lies that taught you to kneel. This is your final descent into memory, the kind of memory not passed through blood, but through fire. It looked like a map, but it wasn't. Not in the way the mind expects. No landmarks, no borders, no cardinal directions. Just a spiral of numbers etched in salt and iron, wrapped around a single phrase in dead Greek. Xi Omicron Delta Omicron Sigma Nu Epsilon Upsilon Tau G Pi Omicron Upsilon exit without place. Evelyn called it the map of unbuilding, and it didn't show you where to go. It showed you what to leave behind. Each coordinate corresponded to a structure, not physical but psychological architecture. Pillars inside the mind, rooms inside belief. This wasn't a trail to a hidden city or buried artifact. It was a sequence for dismantling the cathedral of compliance built inside you. She decoded the first 7 coordinates herself, each one aligned with a ritualized lie you've lived your whole life. The Hall of Names, where your identity was carved before you, could speak. The mirror vault, where beauty was defined to you by others. The seat of obedience, the internal throne reserved for false authority. The echo hall, where only acceptable thoughts were allowed to repeat. The God cage, a divine image designed to watch, not liberate. The dead well, your soul's value measured in metrics and productivity. The last door, the belief that escape is impossible. Each location wasn't guarded by men but by symbols, and to destroy them, Evelyn said, you couldn't use logic. You had to use what built them: emotion, sound, sacrilege. She used tonal sequences, chanting dissonant syllables encoded in Phoenician storm prayers. She poured her shame into sound, her fear into movement. She bled the false myths out through ritual unbinding, and one by one the rooms collapsed. But the map warned her if you unbuild the structure too fast, the void might break you. It wasn't enough to destroy. You had to know how to stand inside the silence afterward when no story remained, when the glyphs stopped glowing, when the gods didn't speak. Most who tried went mad. Others became symbols themselves, ghost echoes of unfinished rituals, wandering through media, dreams and fever visions. But Evelyn survived, and before her final disappearance, she transcribed the 8th coordinate in a code only visible under starlight and ritual breath. It led not to a place but to a moment. The second you stop asking permission, the path appears. No maps, no teachers, just the fire and the silence. You've already started this process, haven't you? You feel your story cracking, your gods fading. The rituals that used to work now feel hollow. That's not failure, that's unbuilding. This isn't spiritual, it's surgical. You're removing architecture put there to farm your will. The map of unbuilding has no end. It ends you, and what's left isn't tamed. In the next section, we'll enter the final rite. Evelyn discovered a forbidden initiation known only in whispers, the ritual of the unnameable, a sequence so dangerous. The 9 erased its practitioners from every archive because it doesn't just erase belief, it erases control, and what rises in its place. Only the unspoken. The ritual of the unnameable predates language itself, older than temples, older than agriculture, older even than organized fear. Whispers of it appear in cultures, oceans, or portalways, accompanied by silence afterward, as if saying too much invites something watching from beyond the grid of names. Evelyn first encountered it as a gap, a missing sequence in a Babylonian incantation tablet. One line intentionally worn smooth, as if the stone feared to speak. That blank returned later in a Siberian shaman's chant, where a verse was only ever danced, never uttered. Then again in a Vatican black archive, a ritual marked unrepeatable by 6 papal bulls. What connects them? A blank space that still acts. The 9 called it Thesis 0. A spiritual kill switch. You see, everything they built, the glyph engine, the synthetic myth, the map of unbuilding it, all functions on naming. Words codify, symbols bind, belief calcifies, control needs definitions to survive. But the ritual of the unnameable, it burns the need to define. Evelyn performed it only once, and described the aftermath as existence without mirrors. No ego, no identity, no myth. Just presence unhooked from the symbolic cage. Here's what little she recorded of the steps, though even writing them down risks activating them. The mirror smash, she stared into a black obsidian plate until her face disappeared. The breath fold, she inhaled syllables that had no meaning, only vibration. The name spill. She wrote every title she'd ever held in blood, then burned it with salt. The unwitnessing, she sat before a circle of 7 blindfolded children. Each whispered a memory that never happened. She accepted them as her own. The crossing, she walked backward over sacred glyphs until she forgot their meaning. The unnamed, she fell asleep chanting the sound of her heartbeat until she heard no sound at all. What happened next? She never said, but something changed. After the ritual, the 9 lost track of her, not just physically, but symbolically. Their surveillance, which relied on semantic tags, names, birth dates, biometrics, simply failed. She had become unindexed. Unsearchable. She no longer existed in story space. The glyphs refused to bind her. Myths failed to reference her. Even dreams couldn't hold her image. Evelyn had passed beyond the grip of the Archivia 9's collective memory field and become what they feared most, a human outside the code. You feel it, don't you? The itch beneath your names. The sense that the person you've performed, isn't the source. That behind the roles, behind the gender, behind the patriot, the rebel, the broken lover, there is someone who was never defined, only disguised. That one, that's the unnameable you. And the ritual. It's not choreography, it's a psychic detonation. It tears your inner framework apart and leaves you standing in the raw field of being, without story, without history, without chain. That is freedom. But it is also terror. Because once you perform the ritual, the world stops recognizing you. Algorithms fail. Social roles stutter. People around you may forget your name or treat you as a stranger. You become unplaceable. But in that exile, you gain the one weapon the Nine cannot track: causal silence. That's where Evelyn lives now, not in a bunker, not in a timeline, but in the space between archetypes. The place where gods cannot see. In the next section, you'll hear what the Nine feared most of Alan's final broadcast: an untraceable, one-time pulse sent on a dying frequency. She spoke only once, but what she said shattered their final defense. The message came at 3:03 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Every analog radio in North America, every forgotten ham set, every detuned shortwave, every dormant crystal receiver crackled awake for precisely 108 seconds. No station ID, no call sign, just static. And then, a voice, calm, unhurried, familiar to some, though they hadn't heard it in years. It was Evelyn. But this wasn't a call for help. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a spell, not the kind with wands or candles, but a linguistic virus, a chain of phonemes coded to bypass both conscious resistance and artificial censorship, designed not to inform, but to infect belief space itself. The Nine had spent centuries sterilizing that space. Their Arkiva hybrid of quantum memory and mythic resonance held the scaffolding of every controlled narrative. Every figure in history, every cultural taboo, every hero, every villain, it was all housed in a field of repeating symbols. The archive was their immune system. Anything too disruptive was absorbed, reframed, or erased. Until Evelyn's broadcast. She didn't challenge the archive. She inverted it. Her voice unfolded a sequence of forbidden structures, contradictions that made logical sense, antiglyphs that unraveled mimetic cohesion, phonetic spirals that caused AI transcription systems to recurse infinitely and crash. Her words were, "Your history is a rehearsal. Your gods are software. Your shame is borrowed. Your thoughts are not your voice. Your myth is not your making. Wake not as a hero, but as a forge." Some say it wasn't even speech. Some say it was encoding a tonal signal that unbound symbolic consent, the same way sacred salt breaks ritual circles. Some listeners vomited. Others wept. A few lost time. But one thing is certain: the archive blinked. Thousands of records became inaccessible. Historical icons began glitching in digital databases. Portraits reshuffled. Maps changed subtly. Even dreams across different regions began synchronizing, populated by a silent woman with a burn across her palm. The Nine tried to patch it. They called it the ghost transmission anomaly. They scrambled to rebind the collective narrative with fresh icons, new influences, viral myths, faster distractions. But it didn't work. The virus Evelyn launched wasn't in the networks, it was in us. The real payload wasn't the message, it was the realization that no myth could hold you without your consent, that the archive only exists because we've agreed to believe it. Evelyn's words cracked the mirror, and mirrors don't heal. Since then, small things have changed. People report feeling invisible in crowds, forgotten at work, slipping out of digital surveillance. Some say they dream more lucidly. Others say they've started remembering stories that don't exist yet, myths forming from within. The Nine can feel it, the resonance slipping, the stories unbinding, the age of scripted belief ending. But before the archive falls completely, they've moved to deploy their final defense: myth reclamation warfare, weaponized nostalgia, digitally resurrected gods, forced myth reboots to reclaim psychic real estate, a final desperate attempt to colonize the future through the past. But Evelyn, even in absence, left a warning encoded in the last 3 seconds of her transmission. Audible only under a moonless sky, using a bone-conducted receiver, they cannot reclaim what is remembered. Wild. The battle ahead won't be fought with armies, it will be fought with memory. In the next section, we'll descend into the vault where the Nine have hidden their myth reclamation tools, artifacts so dangerous they were sealed behind language barriers and cultural amnesia, and we'll discover how Evelyn's forgotten flame burns still in one of them. They built it beneath the Black Library in Oslo, 14 floors underground, reinforced with a concrete polymer blend that absorbed not just vibration, but intention. No cameras, no wireless signals, no words permitted beyond level 10. The vault was constructed for one purpose: to hide belief itself. The Nine called it the lexicon cyst, a prison for unstable myths. Not unstable as in violent, but volatile. Myths that refused to stay still. Stories that remembered being rewritten. Archetypes that, when spoken aloud, would change their own endings. These were too dangerous for deletion. They couldn't be erased without causing psychological backlash. So instead, they were buried. But Evelyn knew where it was. She had decoded the vault's access key not through technology, but through anomalous folk rituals. She followed the trail of forgotten nursery rhymes sung only by twins born during eclipses. She mapped out the architecture of public buildings that hummed in 528 Hz during solstices. She deciphered prayers left behind in asylum walls written backward in invisible ink. During thunderstorms, what she discovered was horrifying. The Nine weren't just storing rogue archetypes, they were harvesting them, stripping wild myths for symbolic part swords, flames, dragons, mothers, betrayers, and reassembling them into synthetic obedience icons. They took the chaos of Dionysus and repurposed it into nightclub marketing. They extracted the judgment of Anubis and embedded it in credit scoring systems. They hollowed Joan of Arc and injected her courage into military recruitment ads. These weren't stories anymore. They were mimetic prosthetics, reattached to the public psyche as tools of control. But inside the vault, past the cages and glass reliquaries, deeper than the Nine's own blueprints, Velen found a crack, a fracture in their myth-sealed that wasn't visible. It was felt, a space in the chamber that resisted symbolism, an absence of resonance. No glyphs would hold in it, no meaning could stabilize. It was mythic antimatter. And in that space Evelyn left a flame, not literal fire, but the broken flame, pre-symbolic archetype, a myth that could not be told without altering the teller. It didn't have a name, because it named you. It existed only when believed outside of language. She encoded it into an impossible object, a Möbius ring made of etched obsidian, suspended in a field of negative resonance. Anyone who looked directly at it forgot it, but anyone who felt for it in silence remembered. That was Evelyn's true plan, to plant a seed of unscripted myth in the very heart of their control grid, a flame that would not rage but unmake. It wouldn't attack the Nine, it would make their stories unbearable to believe. And now, the vault is cracking, the wild myths are leaking. Children have begun speaking old names in sleep. Artists paint symbols they've never seen before. Former operatives report recurring dreams of an obsidian flame whispering, "You do not need their story to exist." The Nine have responded with escalation. They've launched the Narrative Containment Initiative, a global program to sanitize dangerous symbols and combat disinformation mythology. They frame it as safety, but it's a myth or nothing less. Your ability to remember wild stories is now revolutionary, because what you remember you make real. And Evelyn's legacy wasn't a rebellion, it was permission to reforge the world, not through violence but through mythic disobedience. In the final section you'll meet the ones who heard her, the last receivers, the myth figures, those who carry the broken flame, not in doctrine but in choice. The story doesn't end, it escapes. They don't meet in temples, they don't wear robes, they don't call themselves anything at all, but they are out there walking among us like ordinary shadows. The last receivers, the myth figures, the ones who remember what was never taught and feel what was never said. They are janitors who whistle in forgotten tongues, old women who trace glyphs in garden dirt, disillusioned veterans who dream of symbols that burn through their uniforms, teenagers who doodle spirals that speak back. They've all heard Ither whisper behind silence. Evelyn's myth wasn't a message, it was a tuning fork, and those who resonate with it, they don't believe in the system, they don't rebel against it either. They exit internally first, then mythically, you see. The final lie the Nine told wasn't about money or power or gods, it was about time. That history is linear, that your story began in a cradle and ends in a grave, that you're a passenger on someone else's ride. But the last receivers know better. They've accessed the forbidden continuum, a mythic time loop hidden beneath our sanctioned chronology. In it, past and future don't move in straight lines, they bleed into each other. Every act of remembrance becomes a prophecy, every myth recovered becomes a doorway. And this continuum, it's self-writing. Each receiver who awakens doesn't just observe the truth, they alter the mythscape. They cause forbidden symbols to reappear, they fracture consensus, they birth new archetypes just by embodying what the Nine cannot predict. Authentic human will. They are unpredictable because they are unwritten. And that is what terrifies the Nine, not resistance, not exposure, but the loss of narrative authority. Because when you no longer need their story to define you, they vanish. So the Nine fight back with mythic smog, with manufactured legends, with new virtual saviors and AI-crafted prophecy. But it's slipping. More people are remembering backward memories that don't belong to them. Yet explain everything. A homeless man in Chicago draws a flame symbol never documented. A child in Lagos speaks fluent Sumerian during a seizure. A prisoner in Marseille dreams every night of the same collapsing tower and wakes weeping. We deny the permission. The myth is breaking free. And you, hearing this now, are already part of it. Because stories like Evelyn's do not spread by broadcast, they spread by recognition. You don't need to believe every word. You don't need to prove it. You just need to feel the fracture and choose differently. That's what she meant by deweaponizing myth. Not destroying it, but liberating it, refusing to let it be caged inside slogans, flags, or screens, because, at the end of every empire, every spell, every sigil, someone must look into the void and whisper, "I remember what you tried to make me forget," and that whisper, it changes everything. Evelyn is gone, the engine is dust, the Nine are unraveling, but the flame still burns, not in temples, not in banners, in you and everyone who chooses to live unscripted. The myth never ends, it escapes. And now so can you.